Um, my name's John Morrison. I'm a private practice neurosurgeon in Palm Beach. And thank you so much for having me today. I just wanted to go over a little bit about early practice, finding a job, and then private practice currently in the world we live in. I have, as you've seen, no disclosures, despite coming from Buffalo. We just had our Nick Hopkins send off at CNS, and every slide, the disclosure slide was 3 slides long, which cracks me up, but right now, none. For an overview, wanted to talk about as you're finishing residency, looking forward, what steps you need to take. What is the job search like as you're in practice, regardless of what practice you join? How do you grow it? And then if you want to start your own private practice, as I did, what steps you need to take? First and foremost, there's not enough neurosurgeons in the United States. And of all the neurosurgeons there are, they are aging and about to retire. You look at population dynamics, there's one neurosurgeon for every 60,000 Americans. And based on that, the number of cases that come in, pathologies that we deal with, it's simply not enough. And we tend to congregate in areas that we want to be, but nonetheless, it's a right field for our practice. And I put this map in here to show you this is where people live, and that also tends to be where neurosurgeons are, both because that's where the most people are, but likewise, they tend to be areas where people want to live. But if you look in places like the Mountain West or I guess the Ohio River Valley, there's a lot of places that are underserved, and we need more neurosurgeons to be in places like that to serve those populations. And just to start off, before we get into it, my advice is be careful. Any decision you make, someone's going to tell you you're wrong. They're going to tell you you could have done better, etc. But make no mind. Most people out there want to take advantage of you. And it sounds silly, but we're swimming with sharks. And finally, in the word of Sam Hashem, trust no one. Obviously you have to trust people, and we make friends and colleagues and mentors. But at the same time, like, also be wary. So the job search, when should you start? How do you do it? What kind of considerations you have? There's many types of practice, and we'll get into it. Everyone has intangibles, their family, location preferences, city size, dynamics of the place they want to be, things like work-life balance, and then income is always important. The starting point often is PGY 6 year. Towards the end of it, if you're not doing fellowship or early in fellowship, and that helps you have the lead time to both start the job, but then also in the job search. How do you find a job? Well, multiple methods. there's networking. Love your program, hate your program, regardless, your attendings often know other attendings at other programs. They know what the needs are out there and are able to, plant a seed. If you have a subspecialty interest, go to section meetings, meet the other people out there, and there may be recruiters, so on and so forth. And then people that passed before you, say they went to another university, say they went out in private practice, they may have a job need. Keep in touch. There's headhunters, these companies that put out ads, like contact people. It's great. They have a large list of jobs. Say you contact them as the applicant, they'll try and set you up where you want to be. They are connected to hospitals and practices. They're incentivized to get you hired. The downside though is they are incentivized, so they get paid if you're hired, not necessarily for your benefit. They may try and hide things, paint it better than it actually is. A little biased because of that. And then with them involved, you have a little less negotiation potential with the facility you're trying to join. And then there's also websites, e.g. the AANS, the CNS, they have job boards. You can look and see neurosurgeon needed. A lot of the academic jobs show up there, and not necessarily that it's actually open, but those often are filled with word of mouth. Someone knows someone that plugs someone in. Not always the case, but that's what I was saying. It helps to network, have friends within your program that can be your advocate for another program. Again, considerations. So location. Who wants to live in Alaska or Wyoming? Well, there may be a lot of need there, but it's not a desirable place to live often. And then based on the job you're taking, think about the patient population. Is it all trauma, stroke? Is it all boutique, cash only, private? What's the payer mix? And then what kind of competition do you have? If you have 70 other neurosurgeons in 5 miles, that's going to be a harder place than if you're the only neurosurgeon for 1,000 miles. To go over practice models, there's essentially 4 basic premises. Hospital employed means you work for the hospital or the group that's affiliated with a hospital. Private practice is you and your partners are separate from that and have your patients in your practice and bring them where you would like. Academics is probably the most familiar. You work for the group or the university directly. And then locums is a phenomenon that we'll get into in a second, but entirely separate practice model. Regardless, once you come out of training, realize as a chief resident, it's probably the best year of your life neurosurgically. You get to do the best cases you pick. You're on top of the world under your attendings, obviously, but you're doing 400 or 500 cases of the greatest pathology in the world because they're all condensed at your institution. Once you're out, you are now the low person on the totem pole. You are taking call, and regardless of what situation you run into, you have to build a practice. And depending, on your partners and your colleagues, you may get good kisses from them, or you may get only the wind washouts and the epidural abscesses. It's a very interesting world out there. But please keep in mind that's the difference between residency and practice, is that you're on your own credit card now, and you have to build it. And the two keys for a job that I've found: one, you have to want to be there. If you don't have the heart, you're not going to be successful. And then the flip side, they have to want you there. And if they don't, you can fight, you can push, you can scream, but at the end of the day, it's not a happy environment. So find a place that you like and they like you, and reciprocally, you want to be there, they want you to be there. So hospital employed. I've never been in this model, so my apologies if I don't know that much about it. I've talked to many friends and colleagues who are. What they tell me is that there's often a salary guarantee. It's a mix of profit or non-profit corporations that run these places, often restrictive in the contracts and your practice, and you're typically part of a group. And that helps because there's built-in coverage. If you're going out of town, say you get sick, so on and so forth. And likewise, as a group, there's often decent benefits. The downside is your interchangeable parts, in that as soon as you become too expensive or too inconvenient, they can substitute you for a new person. And that seems to be often where medicine is going currently, in that these companies own medicine. You go to, company A doctor, doesn't matter if you're Dr. So-and-so. And that's, I guess, not how I was raised, but nonetheless, that is a model you can enjoy. Academics, probably the most familiar. Most of us went to kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, med school, now residency. We've been in this our whole lives. If you join it, we have colleagues with similar mindsets and goals. We strive for the increasing knowledge. We want to make the world better. Frankly, I was in academics for about a year. And there's teaching opportunities. If you want to work with residents, fellows, pass on your knowledge, it's a great place to be. Likewise, just like today, there's conferences. You can stay abreast of current trends, practice patterns, get CME, makes life kind of easy. If you're interested in research, academics is the place to be. They often will let you, so to speak, take part-time FTE as a clinician and the other part as a researcher. And industry, they actually want to be connected to major academic institutions. It gives them validity. So if you look at a lot of these companies, they'll have associations with surgeons that are at major academic institutions. Adding to that, most of these facilities have the best, newest toys, so to speak. So they get the cutting edge because they're part of that industry, developing things. You get to learn on those things. I used to call it the Star Wars phenomenon, because you learn to operate with all the bells and whistles. And personally, I made a point to try to learn to operate minus all of those. E.g., you're stuck out in the Everglades with a bovie and a spoon, you got to get the keystone. But nonetheless, it's great to have, and you get to learn, and often the whole practice changes while you're in training. And the downside, so I've been told, is the compensation can be lower in academics. Locums is an entire space of medicine that I didn't know about as a med student, as a resident. What it comes down to is the Latin word is to keep the light on. So say me as a solo private practitioner, I want to go on vacation. I'd put up an ad, have a locums doctor come watch my practice. And it's much more common for smaller remote practices, but now it's becoming larger hospital coverage. Gosh, the doc that we have full time needs a break. We need someone to cover the ER for this weekend. Maybe this weekend turns into a year, so on and so forth. It's a very versatile dynamic all over the country. You get to travel if you want to do it. There's literally, I suspect right now, if we looked, 20 states that you could be in for locums neurosurgery. The downsides, yeah, the travel. If you have a family, or even if you're single, it's maybe a bit lonely. You're in a foreign place for a bit, no real connection for work, but nonetheless, it can be financially beneficial. The contracts vary, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but they can be quite lucrative. But the other downside, as you finish residency, you have to think about collecting your cases for boards. And there's an expectation to have consecutive cases with follow-up. If you're bumping around the country, it's hard to do that. Frankly, you may not have access to the MR, to the imaging to pull it up. So for that period that you're collecting cases for boards, it's imperative to have one location get those cases out and not moonlight. And then the other half of it, which we don't really think about, is credentialing. Every hospital you go to is going to ask for your entire life history. And as you add hospitals to that, it's going to get more and more complex. And just like trying to get a letter of reference from someone, adding a hospital to it makes it even more difficult because the people there have the same inhibition to get things done. And then finally, private practice. So I've found it to be the most versatile. It ranges from solo private practice like me to large groups. Look like Carolinas up in North Carolina. They were a large private practice, and now they have a residency program. Within it, you can be a general neurosurgeon, or do subspecialty. The latter, with a large group, makes it easier to do subspecialty. But even with a general neurosurgery is possible. And historically, the compensation model was the best. You as a hiree, it varies obviously, and you may have to work for a year, 2 years, 5 years, quote unquote, to buy in as a partner. And frankly, I don't quite understand that because at least in my practice, being a partner makes no difference because granted, I guess if you have a salary, you get that, but my practice is basically me. You think about these hedge funds and venture capital trying to buy medical practices. If they wanted to buy my practice, they'd have to keep me around, so to speak, because the only reason my practice exists is that I work for it. And then to add to it, it's the most variable. Say you want halftime, say you want to take every Friday off. Realistically, you're in charge, especially if you're solo, but within a group even, you can often make much more calls, specifically on what you want to do. Likewise, there's a lot of autonomy. You choose your own destiny, and you want to make your practice entirely about doing carpal tunnel, you can do that. Or you just want to be a general neurosurgeon, you can do that too. And likewise, it's a high risk, high reward. And historically, that might be why the compensation's higher, is that you take that risk. But on the flip side, there are very high risks. Oop. We're going to get into compensation models just for a second here. And this is regardless of which model you go into. The hospital-based, academics, private practice, locums. You can be straight salary. They'll give you X amount per year, regardless of what you do. There can be salary, and then if you have productivity above a certain threshold, they'll incentivize you. And that can be based on RVUs or collections based. So collections are, we turn everything as a doctor into a CPT code, send it to an insurance company, they send money. If that money comes in, you get that. And RVU changes that CPT code into a number of what the value of time is. And Medicare assigns a certain dollar amount. We'll get into contracts in a second, but for larger institutions, they prefer the RVU model because some insurances pay a lot, some don't. And finally, per diem. And this comes into play mostly in locums, but then also if you take call for stroke, for trauma, or just the ER, they'll often pay you a per diem amount to be on call. And that's part of your base, potentially part of your salary, so on and so forth. And when you are taking the job, all these things are up for grabs. So often there's a signing bonus. It can be up to 10% of your first year salary. Even more, I've heard, but I think that's the most that you're going to realistically be able to ask for. Relocation allowance, say you have to move from Miami to Topeka, Kansas. You got stuff, you got your belongings, got to put a down payment on a house. That's all part of it. And then student loan forgiveness. Many of us have loans from med school. And if you work for companies or practices or institutions like academics, they may, as part of their package, say, look, we'll give you money to pay off your loan, so on and so forth. And then it's a contract. Whatever you want to work into it, or whatever they work into it, is okay. E.g., company car, they'll give you a lease allowance to get what car you want. Sports tickets, if you want to go to the Dolphins or the Panthers. All these things are up for grabs. And if it's in the contract, you get it. But it's a trade-off. I was going to try and put a slide. I couldn't find the actual numbers, but I've been told each neurosurgeon provides about $5 million in value to a facility. And your goal as the new neurosurgeon should be to try and get as close to your value as possible, and I'm not saying 5 million, look at the MGMA data for where you're at, and you know, near the median is reasonable to be a starting point. But as you ask for things, say you want that car, say you want the Dolphins tickets, say you want a week off every month, you have to trade. So you trade your annual salary down, or if you want higher annual salary, trade up for more call, more RVUs, etc. And what it comes down to is it's basic economics. It has to equal the same amount at the end. And obviously, we all want the best deal we can get. And we have different deal points that are going to make or break us. But it comes down to, what do you want and what are you willing to sacrifice? Just an aside, this is a mug that we made in Buffalo as fellows. It just cracked me up. So as you're getting the job, you're going to have a contract. Okay. These are often pages and pages long and legal writing. So best advice, obviously read it through. You're all smart, have a basic understanding of what it's saying, but potentially hire a contract lawyer to look it over and see if you're getting taken advantage of. First and foremost, they can promise you the world, everything you dreamed of, but if it's not in writing in that contract, it didn't happen. So basics, make sure the compensation's in there. What are they paying you? The benefits, what kind of retirement, what kind of health insurance, etc. What's your call obligation? Do you get time off? How much? Do you get CME time off, an allowance, all that stuff. And in medicine in particular, non-competes are a thing. So say you take a job and you work there 5, 10 years even, right? You love it, but circumstances change and you need to leave. Is there a restriction? Do you have to literally move 20 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles? And then likewise, look at the specifics. Does it say your home base, e.g. the hospital you work at? Or does it say any location of the practice? And they may have some remote offsite clinic that you don't ever go to, but still that kills you if it's a 50-mile non-compete from any practice your practice is affiliated with. You might need to go entirely to a new location. And no one wants to think about termination. You know, we take a job, we're happy, we want it to be until death do us part. But likewise, you know, say circumstances change. You have to keep in mind, what's it going to cost you to leave? And the non-compete is part of that. But moreover, some of these initial contracts, it's not a guarantee, it's actually a loan. They expect you to pay yourself back over the next 2 to 5 years. And say you leave after 2 years and you're in the hole. So you're guaranteed X amount, but you only made less than X amount. You owe the difference. And I've had some colleagues that got this arrangement, surprisingly, and it was very unfortunate. And back to the, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. You know, say you're a hotshot fellow coming in and you need a new biplane, you need a new robot, you need a new microscope to do exactly what you did in fellowship or residency. If it's not in your contract, once you start, they may not actually get it, and you're not going to be happy. And that's just the name of the game. They capital allowances are pretty fickle and they change every quarter, but my advice would be to get it in your contract. And then finally, staff. We're not lone wolves as much as we think we are. It takes an immense amount of support staff for us to do what we do. There's in the OR, there's a circulator, there's a scrub tech, pre-op, post-op, the floor, ICU, in your clinic, etc. If you need something in particular that you want to talk about, negotiate it into your contract. As you're looking towards leaving residency, the time frame, as I mentioned, PGY 6 year, I think is a reasonable time. Because of this, the 12 months up until your job starts. So the year away, you need to get references, meaning other doctors that'll attest to your aptitude and sign a form saying, look, I know this person. Get your CV in order. The format varies. I prefer NIH format because you need to send a grant. Many hospitals want the months and years for each experience you had. Get your diplomas. It sounds silly, but why would you need your college diploma? Well, because Hospital X wants that to show that you actually graduated college. And then likewise, you need a list of contacts. And this becomes more and more important further down the road. Like say you do locums, you need each contact in each medical staff office, each chairman of each department, the addresses, the email addresses, the fax numbers, it becomes burdensome. As a resident, that's less burdensome, but still, know that information. So 6 to 10 months out, you want to get licensed in the state that you're going to practice in. Some states are easy, some are difficult. Florida, for instance, often calls you before the board, so you have to go up to Orlando and meet them, and then it works out. But regardless, plan that ahead so you're not suddenly in August 1st not having a license. 3 to 6 months before you start your job, obviously look for housing, work with the credentialing department for the hospital. They're going to help you get insurances. And then the last month, often final requirements, you got to get a physical, maybe some immunizations, and your med mal fires up. So you want to start your own practice, right? That used to be the dream. Maybe it still is, and that's what I did. Hopefully I can give you some insight to it. First and foremost, structure your practice as a business, because that's what it is. You provide a service to people who need medical care, and taxologically, that's how you need to structure it. So file for either an LLC or an S corp. The difference is that an S corp, as it grows, you can give shares to various people, you can sell them, etc. Where a LLC, percentages are held by the partners. File for a tax ID number with the IRS, and that's kind of like a social security number, but it's for your business. So any money you make as a professional goes to that business and not you personally. And obviously you pay yourself from that business, but it separates the two. Once you have that tax ID, you go to a bank, ask for a business bank account, checking account. And that's where you hold that money to pay staff, to pay bills, etc. And as you're starting, a line of credit's helpful. Basically, unless you're independently wealthy, starting a practice is time consuming, but also financially not easy. And then in Florida, we have to file with SunBiz, basically saying we're a business. Here's what we are, what we do, and the people involved. Wherever you open the practice, you have to file for a business license, saying we're in business, pay tax, so on and so forth. I found it useful to use a credentialing company. So insurances, Blue Cross, Medicare even, can take up to 90 days to process your application. And then commercial insurances, e.g. Blue Cross, United, so on and so forth, they may say they're full or closed. And interestingly enough, if you look at their panel, they don't have any neurosurgeons. So this is one of the games they play, and you have to grin and bear it and or fight it, but it takes time, and you don't get paid until you're on panel. Or alternatively, you see them out of network and don't get paid. But patients can always obviously see you out of network and cash pay, but in my experience, medicine is seen as, you know, kind of a human right, and people expect it to be paid by their insurance company. You need office space. Where are you going to see patients? Well, it varies. You can rent your own space, and the location matters. The price for that is anywhere from $20 to $100 a square foot. And if you want your own office, that can be a good place to have your employees be all the time, but also expensive. So maybe you sublet or share. So subletting, another doctor owns the office, lease. You go there 1 day a week, 2 days a week, however many you need. Share it. You split the rent. And likewise, how much you need is you're first starting out. You're not particularly busy. You need 10 exam rooms, maybe just 2. As you grow, things change and you can adapt, but keep in mind economies of scale. And where do you work? Hospital, we're neurosurgeons. Like, you cannot do a craniotomy as an outpatient. And surgery centers, be it as it may, I like outpatient surgery, but they often are pretty fly by night. So it's often better to work in the hospital and do outpatient surgery. Nonetheless, the barrier is higher. One of their first questions is, who's cross covering you? And say you're new in town, you just show up, open your own practice. That's a hard question. So you cold call people, ask, hey, I'm new in town, would you mind? And often the answer is no. But you figure it out. And then geographical restrictions. Often the hospital both requires you to take call, but then also says you cannot live outside this barrier to take call. So that rules in and out certain facilities, unless you want to move. Likewise, need and competition within the hospital. If you go to a hospital that has 0 neurosurgeons, you're the first one, that can be great. It's your own playground, but also can be horrible. You have no infrastructure, no experience, no facilities. Likewise, you go somewhere that all the neurosurgeons are, they may not want a new kid in the sandbox. It may try and push you out. You have to balance that. And then finally, capabilities. As I mentioned, that hospital that has no neurosurgeons, can you do cases you want to do there? Some of what we do is very complex, and I'll tell you, coming from an academic center where you have all the bells and whistles and everything's just done for you, so to speak. You still have to work, don't get me wrong, but you end up at a facility that doesn't have that. You have to know things like, gosh, you know what? The CRM tech can't line it up to get you the end plate or a pedicle, etc. And I find honey attracts more flies and bees than vinegar, but at the same time, enough is enough. And you can kind of see why some of the old salty dogs are so angry, is that it's day in, day out that things aren't being done the way they should be. So that experiential knowledge, obviously, if you want to build it, will be there. But it takes time and takes years off your life. For your own staff, there's a lot of options, right? I started with just an MA, me and an MA, but then started adding, so a nurse, MA's medical assistant, RN's nurse. Someone's got to schedule your surgeries, right? Surgical coordinator, maybe you have x-ray in the office, maybe you're doing kyphoplasty, etc. In the office, x-ray tech. You've got enough patients now, maybe someone to greet them, receptionist, answer the phones. Building and coding's imperative, you got to get paid. So we get into that a tiny bit, but maybe you have enough people to hire an office manager now. PA and P, that's the dream. Have someone you pay to do your work for you. But ultimately they want to see the doctor, right? And it comes down to, what do you need to run your office? And then likewise, what can you afford? And these are conservative estimates currently with inflation, but look at an MA, makes $20 an hour, works 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. That's 2,000 hours a year. So 40,000 a year plus benefits, so on and so forth. Payroll tax. Look at a PA and P, $50 an hour. So that's 100,000 a year plus payroll tax benefits. You have to make this much money gross to pay them, and your rent and your internet and your etc. It becomes a business, and it's something we don't really talk about. And expenses, medical malpractice, as a neurosurgeon, it's about $100,000 a year. Some states like Florida let you go bare. You basically have a letter saying you have the money if you get sued, or you put up a notice saying you don't have insurance and they sue you, they might not get anything. Some hospitals have qualified immunity, meaning the government says, look, if you work here, can't sue them because they're doing a public benefit. Tail coverage, it comes in to the whole job switching thing. So you work for 2 years. For the next 2 years that your statute of limitations are up, you might get sued. The tail coverage is that you're going to be covered for those 2 years. And then there's a phenomenon of occurrence versus claims-based, and it gets back into that tail coverage. You need it. Talk to your insurance agent. If you're still practicing and have insurance, it really doesn't matter that much. But for the state of Florida, it requires you have $250,000 per occurrence and $750 total in insurance. New York State, I do some work there. It's 1.3 million for the occurrence, 3.9 for total. You need liability insurance for your office. Say someone's sitting there, they stand up and slip and fall. Sure, you can fix them, with their compression fracture, but their lawyer is not going to really be happy about you just doing it for free. They want money. You need yourself insurance for health, dental, eye, life. Your family needs that. Your staff, if you're going to provide that for them. Workers' comp, same thing. Your receptionist slips and falls this time. Do you want to pay out of your pocket, or do you want to have an insurance company pay it? And then finally, disability. Mostly for yourself, but yeah, for everyone. And this is something that I didn't quite understand as a resident, because I was thinking, oh gosh, yeah, disability. If I get injured and can't work as a neurosurgeon, I'll still make neurosurgeon salary. No, that's not how it works. You pay the amount you pay monthly, and it only kicks in after 90 days. And then coverage is up to $100,000. And it's meant to be basically a raft for you to figure out how to move on with your life after you're permanently disabled. So that was a surprise to me. How do you build a practice? Well, keep it simple. And I think these rules apply to no matter what model you're in. But for me, I found taking calls a good way that you get patients funneled to your practice. You go to the ER, you see them, you can bill for the ER consult, you give them your card, they're supposed to follow up with you. If they do, great. If they don't, that's what happens. But also you're on call. So other physicians consult neurosurgery, say for back pain, say for brain tumor. You call them back, you meet them, you give them your cell phone, you offer to meet for dinner. You become friends. And call pay gives you a baseline revenue. As I said, there's a per diem often. Say it's $500 a day. You're on 10 days a month. $5,000 coming into your office to help cover that overhead. I'm not a businessman, surprisingly. And I had a lot of friends who were in business school as undergrads, and they always had these things they called networking. I had no idea what it was. It seemed like they just went out for drinks. But what it is, you meet people and you become friends, you socialize. And for neurosurgeons, folks like chiropractors, PTs, etc., here in Florida, helps A, get your name out there, but then B, put a face to the name and personify you. And they may say, look, I like that guy. That's what networking is. Likewise, going to local meetings here in Palm Beach, we have the Palm Beach Medical Society. There's the Florida Neurosurgical Society. Good way to meet folks that are in similar or parallel capacities. And finally, national conferences. Obviously, AANS, but there's all sorts of section conferences and even smaller ones. And then marketing. This kind of was foreign territory to me, and it still is. I made my website myself at first, and it was written in simple HTML, and people said that looks horrible. So I hired a marketer and a web development team, and they took it and ran with it. So now my website actually looks decent. But the internet's a huge place for information and where people both find you, but then if they're referred to you by one of these aforementioned physicians or chiropractors, etc., they look you up. So put your best face forward. Social media, I still don't quite get that. And obviously, I do have a Facebook and Instagram account for the practice, but it's limitedly followed. We put basically some things here and there, and I think there's practices and obviously academic practices that do a great job, and it's engagement, and I love that, and I follow them. And they show cases, they show things they're doing, but as a small solo practice, we're just not there. So it's mostly family and friends that follow me. Print media, newspapers, magazines, they cost money, so I don't really spend much time on it. And then media, like you see all the attorneys on the billboards in 95. There's not too many doctors. A lot of that's centers. You look at various hospitals or networks will put their ad up, but individual doctors not so much. As you build your practice, you're gonna have to decide what you want to do. There's going to be need for clinic days, seeing patients in the office, both new patients and I call them simmering, but you're sending them for various studies, etc. Are they going to need surgery? I don't know. And then post-ops follow-up. Is the hospital or surgery center going to give you a block day? How do you fit that into your schedule? Depending if you're on call, can you do elective surgery? So some of the level 1 trauma centers here in Palm Beach say no elective surgery when you're on call. And obviously there's ways around it, so you have someone covering it, etc. But take that into consideration. And then as you're scheduling surgeries, say I meet someone today, I say, okay, you need surgery. The dance is that it takes 2 to 4 weeks that we send my note to the insurance company. They go see their primary to get the pre-op visit. But the insurance company holds on to that and takes 2 to 4 weeks and often denies it. And then likewise, in private practice, it becomes a matrix of what can you do where? Because not every hospital and not every surgery center take the insurances the same. And likewise, not every patient's willing to travel. Even Palm Beach County, Jupiter's in the north end and Boca Raton's in the south end, and West Palm's in the middle. Often it's hard to get folks from either end to go to West Palm, let alone the other end. It's quite a bit of a dance to do. And then finally, the capability and availability. Say you need a robot and the hospital doesn't have it, well, you can't do that case there. And just a figure, I mean, look at these insurances. It's an astounding number, and frankly, it's prohibitive for patients to really know where they can go and what they can get done. Finally, insurances have idiosyncrasies. Even if it's approved, doesn't mean they're going to pay it. When you send the bill, you have to make sure that your CPT code matches the ICD-10 of the diagnosis. Often they deny it, you require peer-to-peer. This is a charge master. So every insurance pays whatever they're going to pay. You can go on Medicare and look up the value. The CPT code's on the left, so on and so forth. It's just a nightmare. But getting to the end of it here. So early practice, when you're out, what do I recommend? First and foremost, I call it load the boat, but even if you're in solo practice, talk to other surgeons that are more experienced and have been in practice longer than you, and ask them, especially for bigger cases, can you come help me? Make friends with your associates in various fields. You need a pro surgeon for a ALIF, for a transthoracic, so on and so forth. Get to know them. My old chairman, he said, aim for base hits. You have to establish yourself as a safe and consistent surgeon. So doing 100 microdiscectomies in a row is fine, and then finally you do that one T10 to pelvis and it works out great. But you do that first. You got to do 100 monkey discs after that to get your reputation back, and probably more. So just for the first year or two, even 5, just take it easy. In the OR, act like you've been there before. It's not your first rodeo, even if it feels like it is. Just be a professional. Show up early, know what you need, tell the specifics, and then, as always, the 3 A's: availability, affability, and finally, ability. That's how you got here in the first place. When you have complications, first and foremost, ask for help. Don't hide it. It happens. Talk to the family. They need to know. Have a plan. Let them know what the plan is. And finally, it's a contact sport. We're neurosurgeons. We deal with death and destruction. It happens. If someone tells you they've never had a complication, I think they're lying, but that's just me. And final advice: when you're looking at films, look at every sequence. May look like a met, maybe it's an abscess. That's why those sequences are there. Answer the phone. People call you, they call you for a reason. Even if you're not on call, maybe they're giving you a consult. Just be available. Finally, build bridges, try and make friends. And I call it lead with the long hand. This is what Dr. Levy taught me, is that you give without the expectation that you need. And then finally, if you do need, they're more willing to give back. That's all I have. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
All right, well, thank you very much, Dr. Morrison. That was great. I think we'll go on with the Miami Project presentation with Dr. McMillan.
Okay, Howard, thank you. This is Dalton. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for that interesting talk on private practice. In many ways, it kind of seems similar to what happens when a new academic clinician or basic scientist comes into a university and has to reach out to many people to build a not a practice, but a scientific program. So a lot of lessons learned in what you talked about today. So thank you very much. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce David McMillan. David is a research assistant professor in the Department of Neurological Surgery, and we've been very fortunate to recruit him from physical medicine and rehabilitation to the project to lead our educational and outreach programs. He's doing an excellent job, and he just recently, he and his colleagues received a ULink award from the University of Miami that's allowing the group to look at a diversity population in South Florida and other places, and how the weather changes or climate change are affecting their ability to do well during disasters such as hurricanes. So David, thank you very much for joining us today, and David McMillan.
Appreciated. So here we go. We'll be talking today, as a disclaimer, this will be a very not neurosurgical discussion about the risks and reward that the tropical Atlantic poses for people living with spinal cord injuries, and more generalizably, people with disabilities, but coming to you from the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. This is the center of our mission, is spinal cord injury, although what we do does tend to scale to other neurological conditions. And so we'll be talking about some specific cases such as hurricanes, and we'll move from, if we move on to the outline here, from talking about risks in the middle, we'll have a quick discussion about some resilience opportunities and how I've been working to partnering with local county and other partners, nonprofit, to act on some of those risks. And then at the end, we'll completely transition and we'll just talk about the rewards of the ocean. And I'll show some beautiful pictures of some work that we're working on right now. And as we move through this, we'll go from more science-based, more scientific, to more what will in the future generate data, but right now is a lot more of just service provision that's happening outside of the walls. So when we talk about disability and climate, why am I coming to you about this topic from here in Miami? I will say Danielle Levine Cava, who I was speaking to yesterday, actually our county mayor, the National Climate Assessment, which is the United States federal version of the IPCC, which is the largest climate change policy document used in the world. They all use these exact words when they're referring to Miami in particular. One, they say that we're ground zero, and two, they say that we're writing the playbook. So what is done here with regards to certain climate hazards, such as hurricanes, which are obvious, which we'll discuss, but also things like heat, which in the news has been prevalent this year. And then things like flooding and sea level rise, which any of us who have a mortgage are thinking about. In Miami, this is the largest metropolitan area in the United States that will directly see these impacts, in our lifetimes and in the near future. And so what I want to call upon is that language used by these officials at the county level, the federal level, focuses on place. Miami is a place. And I want to say that if we're going to change the narrative to focus on a people, we should start with those most vulnerable. And if you think about someone with a cervical spinal cord injury, complete tetraplegia, you're probably, when it comes to most of these things, when it comes to heat, thermoregulatory issues, when it comes to flooding, the inability to move yourself, the fact that they're bound to a large electronically driven device, all of these things are to be considered. And so that's why we're starting here. Okay, so I show you a quick video here that was produced in collaboration with some of my colleagues who are on the Rosenstiel School. And if we get it started at the right point here, I think we're supposed to be right around here. Are we getting the audio share as well?
Not yet.
And try that again.
Since then,
Is that going?
we have been
Yes.
having
Okay.
a lot of fun doing it together.
Well, I am Daniel Samano. I am a researcher at the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. I have been working there for the last 5 years. Initially, I met Lily because I was managing a study focusing on quality of life and improvement in spinal cord injury. We've been running since, and this year we did our 4th full marathon and our 6th half marathon.
In this film, we're considering a lot the theme of equity and climate preparedness. I know you both are probably itching to get out on your jog, but can you just kind of walk us through what are some of the special considerations you need to take? Whether it's heat or water or the times of days when you can go running.
Definitely, it depends on the season. If it is summer or if it is usually during the hurricane season, it's sometimes like raining. We cannot go out running. Not because of the rain actually impeding us from watching or something, but because of the body thermoregulation. So if it gets super wet and then windy, I'm being dramatic, but she may become hypothermic. So we have been in situations where it is raining and pouring and people just keep running because it's actually refreshing, right? For able-bodied individuals. Whereas for Lily, it's concerning. I'm like, okay, so it's raining. If there is a flooding, we're not gonna make it home.
And Lily, do you also have challenges if you get too hot?
Yes. When I'm too hot, it happens actually more often than the cold because I feel good because I'm enjoying. And if I'm not taking water and under the sun for a long time, I can pass away. I feel like I lose my energy in 1 second.
One of the challenging parts of spinal cord injury is that the feeling, the actual body representation, the body feeling of headaches or different kind of pains, it's a limitation because they don't know where it is coming from. They don't know how to describe it. Even though the body is under a lot of stress, they cannot really respond to it. So there are different things happening. Lily has a high-level injury, meaning, for example, it is difficult for her to make it to a point where she can sweat.
Yeah. And when I get cold, I'm cold for more than 4 hours, even though I'm at home and
Okay, so Lily and Daniel continue on discussing some of these non-obvious ways that her life is impacted by the environment, by temperature, by flooding. She doesn't discuss hurricanes in that case, but she does have examples of that. And to the audience here, a lot of these things are going to sound familiar, but I will say, having talked to people who are, in this case, Dr. Catherine Katie J. Mock, who's a professor at our Rosenstiel School, the only staff scientist paid by the IPCC for an entire cycle. Those cycles run between 2 and 4 years. And one of the primary authors of the 17 chapters of the IPCC. Let's keep in mind there's over 1,000 authors that contribute to that document. She was largely unaware of this. There's an entire section. There's 3 main sections in the IPCC, and the third one would you think would be focused on topics such as this, and every one of the people from that I've spoken to, these are non-obvious. And we're here in South Florida. So South Florida is flat, it's snowless, there's no state income tax, and we have these great hospital systems such as the one that we're all working from and sitting within. And so because of that, we're a lighthouse. We call these people to this region. People get injured and they tend to move to this area. And as that's demonstrated by this picture right here that I took, standing on a ladder. I needed a 20-foot ladder to put all the people in wheelchairs within my camera frame. And this was taken at a nonprofit organization called Shake a Leg Miami. We've partnered with them on some of this research. We'll see at the end. And so in contrast with that call, the fact that we're a lighthouse, we're calling these people in, it's contrast acutely with these climate hazards. And these are made most obvious through hurricanes. And so we'll focus a little bit on that. But I think in a really important way, it's really heat that might be the most important chronic stressor to these people. So as was highlighted at the beginning here, I identified this problem mostly because through my position as Director of Outreach, I'm interfacing with the community a lot. I'm asking these people what they think are some of the most important things impacting their lives. And especially certain times of year, especially right around April, May, June, leading into the hurricane season, there's just a lot of vicarious anxiety that's going throughout the community. And so thought about how to address this. And it started with us writing this grant that linked me to experts, because I'm not a climatologist. I am not an expert in hurricanes. And if you saw the video at the beginning of this presentation, I'm also not an expert when it comes to some of the ways that maybe we can be communicating this information to broader audiences. And so through School of Communication, the Rosenstiel School, School of Architecture, Public Health, and then us, we won this ULINK grant. And since then, we have expanded from discussing the topic of hurricanes out to including flooding and heat, as these things are known to be important climate stressors. So at the beginning here in Chapter 1, we'll be discussing the science that came out of that. It's really a 2-part study, started with a survey and then expanded into an interview. The interview results are being analyzed right now. So we'll see some of the late-breaking data there. And then we'll move into some of the partnered approaches for possible solutions. So when it comes to the disability climate blind spot, for this audience, you might not need too much attention pointed at this. But when I look at this person, one of the things I think of is they're wearing a rain suit. How did they get themselves into that rain suit? Probably required assistance. They have a power wheelchair that they're moving. The battery's at the bottom of that wheelchair, right in between the drive wheels. And that's puts it at highest risk for water in the sense of flooding. They've got an umbrella if a strong gust of wind were to blow. I'm not sure how they could orient that umbrella into the wind very well. Would it be blown out of their hands? Also, they're operating their power wheelchair here with one of their hands and the umbrella's in the other. And so now if, like, let's say their child were to call and say, "Hey, Mom, are you okay? You know, there's an extreme weather event," they can't pick the phone up. And so there's all these different things where if you're not in the culture, you don't deal with these people on a daily basis, and you look at this, you're not thinking of as these unique risks in this population. When it comes to the medical material required for these people to live with chronic disability, which they do well nowadays, and they live great lives because of this, it is still quite a logistical consideration. So you have DME and consumables, and on the durable side, some people, even at home, are vent dependent. Considerations there for power outages. A lot of people rely on power wheelchairs. We'll see in the sample size from the survey, at least. It's over half of the people are power wheelchair users. And so electricity requirements are considered there as well as the weight of those vehicles and the environment in which they're designed to operate. Other ambulatory devices, simpler things like transfer boards, but in the context of like hurricane sheltering and transferring onto novel services, those can be like a go, no go. And then when it comes to bathing, toileting, commode, shower chairs, sleeping, all pressure surfaces. And these are the types of considerations that are, I think, simple and yet not being considered at all as you scale up to the county level. And then the consumables, which are obvious, and actually from our research, we know that people living with these conditions, they're acutely aware of the need to be overstocking these supplies. Sometimes they may or may not have the economic means to do so. A lot of times their medical professionals are helping them do that, which is great. But there's going to be a point where the supply runs out if, we get the big enough one that hits, and there will be quite some considerations after that. And if we fail to do these things, then there is a risk of direct and indirect mortality. So obviously drowning, which is leading cause of direct death in all hurricane situations. Acute risk to that, especially for people who can't move themselves. Some unfortunate examples of that from Lee County last year. Blunt trauma from flying objects. This is the one that's highlighted in the news. It's actually quite uncommon in terms of causes of death in a hurricane. Hyper and hypothermia. And as Daniel pointed out, the hypothermia is uniquely a risk in this population, but hyper as well. But the people that we speak with are aware of their thermoregulatory insufficiencies, especially if they have a cervical spinal cord injury. And then what I'm calling a direct mortality, but just from autonomic dysreflexia in any of these situations, if they're in a seating situation that's not good, if they can't void because they ran out of catheters, if they haven't had their bowel program and they're impacted, autonomic dysreflexia is a unique consideration across any emergency response situation. And then indirectly, respiratory infection is still the leading cause of death in people with chronic tetraplegia across multiple first world countries even. And so if you're in a sheltering situation or if you're in an indoor situation and you've reduced the circulation of air in the building, and all of this increases risk of respiratory transmission and getting an infection there. Impaction, which we brought up previously, and skin wounds, which can lead to infection. All of these can lead to sepsis and the possibility for pneumonia from one of those viral or bacterial respiratory infections that I brought up before. And so we go through all of that and we think, okay, all right, so to a lot of people in this audience, a lot of that was probably pretty obvious, but it's quite a consideration. So what do we do? And so what the county says, actually, they don't publicize this and they don't do so for a reason, but there's going to be various levels of sheltering that are available to these people with unique special medical needs. That's the term that's used by the county. And at the highest level, there's MMFs, medical management facilities. And so that would be kind of like tier 3 of the medical needs. And so if you have one of these conditions, especially if you have like an acute skin wound that comes with your tetraplegia or something like this, you'll shelter in one of these MMFs, and different hospitals may or may not be designated as MMFs depending on the location of the storm, which direction it's coming, the flood risks. And then you start to plot where these MMFs are, and you plot them on the background of flood risk. And the figure on slide right here is from the National Climate Assessment, round 4, which is the most recent in chapter 14 that's on climate and health. And Miami is used as an example in that document, as I was saying at the beginning of the presentation. And then on the left is a scientific study that was published recently, and looking just at the entire eastern seaboard into the Gulf. And as you can see in both of these, if we just focus on the red dots, and there's many of those, you can see where hospital facilities are, major hospital facilities. They're focusing on hospital facilities with trauma centers. And you can see those plotted, especially in red, is going to be in areas of extremely high flood risk, even with pretty mild storms. And you have, especially in the paper that's on slide left, the percentage of hospital beds at risk with a certain category. This is a Cat 2 hurricane that's within, not direct impact, but within the impact zone of the storm. And you can see between 86 to 100% of hospital beds in a lot of the places that we would be designating as the solutions for these people if the storm were coming. So the solution to the problem is put right in the middle of where the problem is going to be the worst. And so in response to all of this, we stood up a team. So this is a large part of the team. And if I can just give a shout out to Dr. David Gator, who has since passed. He was the previous chair of physical medicine and rehabilitation, my postdoctoral mentor, and one of the reasons a lot of this work started. We went through an integrative knowledge translation, or this would be community-based participatory research is the word that the NIH uses, process based on these guiding principles, which are published and evidence-based. We reached out to the community, we engaged partners, and we asked them to come in and help inform our research and point us in the right direction. So in doing so, we developed a survey. The survey is really a knowledge, attitudes, and behavior survey, which is a very common approach in social psychology. And so we started off by mirroring the demographics on the Spinal Cord Injury Model Systems Form 2. We are a Spinal Cord Injury Model Systems Center. And so we could take the demographic information from this survey and compare it to a relevant national statistical database. And then after that, we asked essentially about the KAB knowledge, which you'll see as knowledge or resource knowledge throughout the data as we present it later. Attitudes, which would be personal capacity and comfort. There's kind of two categories in attitudes there in terms of what they think they can do and what they're actually planning on doing. And then behaviors, which is resource utilization. And as we go through this and we start to look at some of the outcomes, I just want to point out a theme, and the theme is going to be underutilization. So people in general, they know about these resources. They're pretty confident in their ability to use them, but they don't. They do not engage with these resources. And that's one of the big questions we have with the follow-up interview. So if we look at the number of participants with fully usable data sets, we're just over 60 people that were in the study. Average age of about 51 years old. Most people are in Dade County, some in Broward, Palm Beach. The 5 other are in Monroe County. So that's kind of the Quad County area that we were focused on here. We can see that a lot of these people are partnered, either currently or previously, which can say something about possibly their home situation, what kind of help they can rely on. Disproportionately a little higher tetraplegia than paraplegia. If we have complete and incomplete injuries here, just point out that a lot of people are reporting unknown in terms of their Asinski or Asia Impairment Scale, AIS, A, B, C, or D. And that's something that we're acutely aware of and that we actually have other studies addressing, which is really important. A lot of power wheelchair users, and just point out here that a lot of people actually have their own private vehicles. So we are essentially, through this survey, we've recruited a biased sample that is more the cream of the crop. So I just want to point out that a lot of people aren't going to have the transportation options these people have access to. So importantly, with the consumable medical supplies, a lot of people using intermittent catheters, a lot of people using suppositories, some enemas for their bowel. And then just pointing out here that some people have relied on surgical options to manage their bowel and bladder, which in an acute sheltering or emergency response situation could have some increased risk for infection. Okay, we come down and we'll actually zoom in on each of these, but if we just take a broad look, these are all of the different questions that were asked in the survey. All are asked on a visual analog scale, essentially 0 to 100, with anything to the left towards 0 being a less favorable response and anything to the right being a more favorable response. And then we have the knowledge, attitude, and behaviors categories, which are color coordinated here. So when we get into resource knowledge, I can just summarize this, but you can see a kind of distribution where as you go from the top, you have less, and as you get toward the bottom, you have more. And the order of these questions is from federal down to more municipal. And this is actually how the entire system is designed to work. So these people have less knowledge of federal resources, some knowledge of state resources, and then higher knowledge of county and city resources. And if you look at FEMA's only involved really in the response situation, and every emergency Office of Emergency Management in the United States, they say that this is the plan. So the plan is working. The plan is for the people to know about their city and their county resources, and they don't have to think too much about state and federal unless something bad happens. So in terms of preparedness, this is great. This is what we want to see. In terms of personal capacity, a lot of people, you can see most of the median lines here in these box and whisker plots are to the right of the 50%. So most people are responding favorably. A lot of people had kits. They report having kits. They report knowing how to build a kit. And so they see themselves as having pretty high personal capacity. They are able to understand the resources, and they are pretty confident in their ability to prepare for things. When it comes to comfort, though, we can now see more of these median lines for the box and whisker plots falling on the unfavorable side of the VAS scales. And so although they think that they are able to respond to these things, when you ask them if they're worried about that, if they're having anxiety about this, they're going to say, yeah, I think I can do it. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't really want to. And so there's a little bit of a theme which is going to come up again. So I said previously, underutilization is one theme, and the other theme is going to be that of learned helplessness. So what we'll see is, and those tie together, what we'll see is these people don't feel like they have options. And we'll see some direct quotes from the interview study to show that. But essentially, the option tree is constrained at step 2. So of the 5 steps that you're supposed to have in response in preparing for an emergency, first is to register yourself and register more locally than you do state and federally. And these people do a great job of that. It's a special needs registry managed through Miami-Dade County, and almost everyone knows about that. You're then supposed to determine if you're going to shelter in place or evacuate. And when it comes to the decision tree here, these people essentially, they're not going to shelter in a county shelter. They often don't have access to transportation, so they're not evacuating to shelter elsewhere offsite. And so their decision is constrained to sheltering in place. So they're going to, wherever they live, whether or not that is the right place to be, whether or not that is in a flood zone, whether or not they're going to have power restored, the decision tree is constrained, and they're just going to stay in their home and hope that the big one doesn't hit. And so that's the learned helplessness component. Okay, and when it comes to the utilization, so knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, we're onto the behaviors component of the survey here. And there's 64, I think, responses in this data set, almost 80 people in total with data sets that were filled out. Some weren't full, so they're not in this data. But of all of those, 3 people said that they used special transportation services in response to a hurricane. And 1 of all of those people said that they had been to a special needs shelter in response to a hurricane. And if you're to add up the number of years that these people have lived in Dade and do the math on how many storms that is, it's a substantial amount of exposure to hurricanes. And so the underutilization is evidence here. Statistically, sometimes it's hard to capture these things because absence of proof is not proof of absence. But what we have is a single person who had been to a shelter. And if you look at the top here, these are the visual analog scales with the questions about transportation and sheltering county provided in response to a hurricane. And you can see the unfavorable responses from this one participant who's in the purplish color here. At the top, one person had a favorable response with transportation. 2 people had unfavorable responses in general with transportation, and the one person who had been to the shelter had a quite unfavorable response. And I will say that this person reported developing in response to sheltering 4 skin wounds, mostly on their buttocks, and then they were discharged from the shelter, if that's the correct term to use, returned to home. And they resolved those 4 skin wounds, which we all know how long that can take, because of their own care routine at home. They didn't provide any, or they weren't provided with any medical assistance, and with the help of their partner, who also happens to be a nurse. So if it wasn't a situation where their partner was, highly educated in these topics, and they probably had access to some supplies, and so this is a vicarious trauma. This is a horror story. This is a reputation that's going to make it through the grapevine. This community is very well connected. They have very high standards for they know that if they get these things wrong, that it's going to be an acute risk to their health and possibly lead to death. And so they are just not going to interface with something that's going to result in this, right? 4 pressure wounds might be worse than a little bit of water on your feet in your home, I think, is the situation that they're imagining. Okay, pardon, this is zooming in on both those questions. We've gone over that. Okay, great. So now we'll move on to the interview study. So the learned helplessness as a theme from the survey, that really is a hypothesis generated from the survey data, and the underutilization, which was just evident in the data itself, was clear, led us to develop this survey approach, this interview approach. And really what we wanted to focus on was the hurricane and the sheltering, but at the same time also expand into flooding and heat. And what we're essentially doing is for each of those categories, hurricanes, flooding, and heat, through this semi-structured interview that was done by an interviewer who had a lot of experience working with these people and living in South Florida. So that's important. We're going through each of these levels of asking if the person, if you've directly experienced a hurricane, flooding, or heat, did you have a preparation plan for that, or for hurricane, flooding, or heat? And if you had a magic wand, what would you change? So then we're doing a little bit of exploration for solutions there. And then the analytic approach here was a directed content analysis. And we're actually at the point where we're about, I would say 80% done with the analysis. And we've actually started writing the paper for this. So, less people in this interview study, but it generates mountains and mountains of data. And so this is considered a quite large sample size for an approach like this. You can see that about the same number of people are married, a little bit less here and a little bit less on the power wheelchair user side. And in these demographics, we have less in-depth demographics here than we did for the survey, because in the survey we asked for the full SCIMS form 2, and in the interview we essentially asked a couple questions at the beginning that were verbal. Okay, so in terms of all of the coded themes here, this is essentially step 1 in this iterative process in the directed content analysis. Is we count the frequency of codes and we create a code book from that. This is the full code book. And so we could dive into all this, but if we just look at the 5 most frequently coded codes and then the 4 lowest, sorry, it's 4 for both of those. We can see at the top, feelings related to sheltering, independent of the reason for sheltering, was the most highly frequented code. And we were asking about, preparation, magic wand, flooding, heat. We weren't only asking about sheltering. So there's a lot of feelings about sheltering. And all of those feelings about sheltering are coming about hurricanes, next 2 highest coded. And then after that, awareness of family, friends, and caregiver support, which is probably obvious to a lot of us. These people come in dyads, they have attendance, et cetera, et cetera. But I was very happy to see that these the participants are thinking about this. But if we look at the most low frequented codes, all of them are related to heat. It's quite interesting. Maybe because we were asking some questions about sheltering, maybe we had primed them a little bit on the topic of sheltering. Maybe they'd kind of primed themselves because they wanted to talk about that. But heat is seen as a non-problem. It's not even being discussed by the participants. And I think that's something that all of us should be aware of, because we know the risk to heat here in both an acute and a chronic sense. And so we should all be directing our participants, our patients towards that. Okay, so on the interview side, just to point out some of the notable quotes here. And so we haven't yet gone through the point. We actually have thematic clusters from the directed content analysis, but we haven't gotten to the full analysis yet. All of that will be available in the paper. So I'll just point out some notable quotes that kind of point at some of the themes that I was discussing before. So on preparation, most people are quite aware that they're supposed to have their consumable supplies in order. And so here's one of the participants right here. I check my medicine. I would never go below a 30-day supply in my home. Great. That's awesome. Here's another participant. Yeah, definitely, man. I have a whole bunch of catheters. I have them well stocked just in case of an emergency. So I think that this is great. This is outside of the context of a hurricane. It's not like a storm's coming. They just always have a stock of catheters. It's great they're able to do that. And one quote that I found quite interesting was this participant describing how they were able to stock their medical supplies. So we were able to get medical supplies, but instead of doing it here in the States, we went directly back to Colombia. That's the country they're from. And we were able to get catheters that I needed and stuff like that. So often I think there's a bit of a trope line seeing the United States as a place where people come to get better medical care. But in this case, and who knows, they might have been referring to a situation during COVID or something that supplies chains disrupted. They actually returned to Colombia to get their medical supplies and then came back to Miami. Okay, so if we move past these people's evident need to supply or to stock medical supplies, we can then get onto the shelters. So the first quote here, I think, is the simplest demonstration of what I'm calling that underutilization. So this participant says, I don't have nothing against it, but I will not go to one of those shelters. So I was not conducting these interviews. I might have pressed back and said, I think you might have something against it. Please tell me the reason that you will not go. Some of the other quotes will expand on that, but that's just the simplest way to put it. This person's being respectful. And they're probably relying on intuition. They might not be able to state all of the reasons they won't go, but they are just not going to go. So the decision is made for them. They are sheltering in place or they are evacuating with a vehicle. And if they don't have access to a vehicle, essentially their decision is made for them. They're just staying in their home and they're hoping their home doesn't fall apart during the storm. Okay. Next person, they repeat the question they were asked and they say, well, no, I wouldn't go. I mean, I think I just got to get myself away from the direction of the hurricane, that the hurricane is coming, and just rent anywhere, or, just go anywhere. So this is quite common. So again, they're saying they just won't go. They don't quite say why, but we'll see in further quotes. Some people do expand on that. And then here it looks like this person has access to transportation and they say rent anywhere. They're probably just going to go to a hotel somewhere in Central Florida or up into Georgia, which is quite common. Some of us have probably done that ourselves. Okay, so some of these quotes start to expand on the reasons why these people probably aren't entering the shelters. So this participant says, we don't have that flexibility. So in people with disabilities, you got to be more prepared than regular people, because you've got to say to yourself, okay, I can't go to that shelter. I can't go to that shelter. I have special needs. So there are only two choices: either leave the state and go to a hotel, or make your house into a fort. So there you go. Make your house into a fort. I can't go to that shelter. And here this person's pointing at a lack of flexibility. So here are, and this, I believe, we have two more batches of quotes, and these actually expand on some of the reasons. So importantly, and you don't know this unless you try and do it, the special needs shelters say that if you're a person with special medical needs, you have a disability, you're coming to the shelter, you can bring one attendant. One. All right. So people with special needs are seen as being the recipients of care and not the providers of care. As I showed, many of these people are married, many are employed, many have children. And so they are the care providers in many cases. And so this person expands, I had to make a decision to either have my wife stay with me or my caregiver, and I choose my wife. And I think most of us agree with this person. And so if you're being forced into that binary, and especially if you have a wife and kids, and definitely your wife and your kids, pick one, pick your wife or your kids. No, I'm not doing that. I'm going to stay in my fort. I'm going to make my house into a fort. Okay, so then we move on to some of the other quotes. I would not go to a nearby shelter because I got catheters. I got to do my bowel program and it's not accessible. So when we start to poke at why these people aren't entering shelters, one of the big reasons is self-care routines and the anticipation that the facilities are not going to be set up in a way that allows these to be formed, in a sterile environment is part of it. And then another part is with dignity. Most of these people are anticipating that they're going to have to perform these routines just out in the open, in the middle of a large, if you will, hangar or bay or gymnasium type situation. And they are not open to that. So this last quote on this page, they are not going to understand that even though my blood pressure is 120/80, that's high for me. My normal blood pressure is 90/70, 74. I love how this person knows this. So 20 millimeters of mercury, I think that's actually an evidence-based cutoff. Over 90 to me is 110, and that's autonomic reflexia, siccus reflexia. I mean, I'd be getting a headache and sweating, but they're likely not to know something that's going on. So the shelter's staff's knowledge of these people's situation is, I think, one of the big barriers here, and one of the things that the community is intuiting is not going to be there. It's just going to be absent. These people even show up at outpatient clinics and primary care clinics, and medical professionals aren't even aware of some of the components of their situation. And so in a special needs shelter where you might have volunteers and just, first responders, not even nurses, et cetera, they're anticipating that it's going to be even worse. So on this last quote, why am I going to risk the factor of going to a place that is not going to give me 100% of what I need? It's going to be an air mattress that has rotating pressure to prevent any wounds. I think they're saying that rhetorically. And somewhere that I will be able to have a bowel program and not scare everyone in the world, and not be put in a position that I may not be able to have a bowel program for 2 or 3 days. It could kill me. So I'm not going to risk myself for their lack of experience. This basically summarizes the whole thing here. It's really good. This person knows that if they aren't adhering to their bowel programs, there's acute risks to their health. And they're kind of scaling all this back onto the lack of experience of the staff in the shelter. So in one way, this is actionable because education of shelter staff is something that could be less resource intensive than something like the rotating air mattress that I can guarantee the shelters will not have. But here you go. So turn your house into a fort, or go get a hotel in Atlanta. Okay, so those are the results of the survey and interview study. We'll move on to some approaches on the resilient side that I had for partnering to find some near-term solutions. and then we'll get on to the fun reward side at the end. So I'm going to move through this pretty quickly because we're about 37 minutes in right here. And so one of the approaches that we've had here is to call a hurricane scenario meeting. And so my father's in the military. This is like red team, blue team. What we're going to do here is war game a hurricane with all of the key players involved. And what we've done is we've called NWS Miami. And so what's it going to look like on the communication side of things? Local nonprofit leadership from spinal cord injury support groups who are essentially going to do the call down and know everyone with spinal cord injuries. We've got Office of Emergency Management, Office of Parks, Rec, and Open Spaces, which is actually quite involved in the emergency response. And then we have a hurricane expert who's sitting at the front next to me, next to the screen here on the picture left. And that's Brian McNulby. And so what he's done is he's created a hurricane scenario for us. That's a little bit of a worst case situation where hurricane's coming in and it's going to cause storm surge that's going to impact JMMH. And so he runs us through that, and he essentially starts at 48 hours and then walks it down 24 hours, 12 hours impact, and then post-storm response. And each of those time points, each of the players here says what they're going to do. And from that, we generated this kind of scenario outcome in the pre-hazard and the post-hazard phases. We have a bit of a summary of what everyone was thinking. But I think most importantly is we put everyone in that room. And so when this does happen, even though this is a relatively small population of people, they are disproportionately represented in Dade County, like I was saying at the beginning. And at least we've gone through like who's going to call who. And communication actually turned out to be a huge part of this. Because in the end, if you can ID those MMFs, which aren't publicly announced, and you can get these people to them, they are at least going to be in a medical facility that's going to help with that. So, okay, great. After this, we've run a number of hurricane preparation boot camps where we essentially go through those 5 steps that I've described, and we educate people on how to go through these. One important step, for example, would be if you have durable medical equipment at your home, you can go to Florida Power and Lighting, and you can request to have a medical priority in terms of reestablishing power to the grid in your area. Whether or not that works, but at least you can register for these services, right? And so in these boot camps, we kind of go over these. 2 of these boot camps have been attended by Office of Emergency Management from county, and they've actually turned out to be kind of Q&A sessions because the county does their presentation, and then afterwards, you just have a bunch of people with spinal cord injuries who have a lot of questions, and you have a captive audience. So those have been great. Through NWS Miami, we have become a Weather Ready Nation ambassador site or location. And so we have worked on disability-specific weather communication. So if you see, for example, flood communication, don't drive your car through the puddles, right? Through the flooded areas, because you don't know how deep that is, and your exhaust pipe gets underneath it, and you can flood your engine. And don't drive your power wheelchair into those things too. You know, it could be like these little tweaks that we make so that weather communication, especially for extreme weather events, is kind of honed to disability. And we make the argument to NWS Miami, to spinal cord injury in particular, and they've actually, we're setting this up, said that we could come and give them a presentation about disability and climate hazards. And maybe then NWS Miami would serve as kind of the node to what could become a larger NWS effort to have disability-specific weather communication. So working on that presentation. We've taken a lot of this information, like, for example, those 5 steps that are tuned to spinal cord injury now, the 5 emergency management steps, and translated them into a website. So that was previously in a PDF. It's on a website. The website is actually being migrated right now into an earth.miami.edu site through the Rosenstiel School, which helps to establish a lot of credibility in terms of these are academics, it's .edu. And when it comes to things like climatology, Rosenstiel just has a worldwide reputation, right? And so essentially what you see here are these 5 steps, and now they're in a web page form. Everything's hyperlinked. It's great. And then this will be on an earth.miami.edu site. We've done multiple different science communication efforts in the form of podcasts and documentaries. These documentaries are all in collaboration with colleagues on the School of Communication. You can go and you can check them out. And they've been really professionally produced, and can't say enough. If you have a science communication mission and you reach out to the Coral Gables campus in the School of Communication, it's pretty amazing how open they're probably going to be to whatever work you're doing, because, you know, I'll just say this as a bit of a provocative trope line, is like if you're doing like documentaries about like travel and like maybe like food or something like that, and then you're asked to do something about this, you might find it slightly more meaningful. So they've been totally on board. And then we are also part of the Climate Resilience Academy, which has a flagship course, which is built off of CRA modules. So on the Gables campus, it's pretty unique. It actually runs kind of like a medical curriculum in terms of my experience, where you have a single course taught by about a dozen instructors. And for one of these modules, module 10, which is on climate justice, with Katie, who I brought up previously, we use spinal cord injury as the beachhead example of a climate justice situation that's unique here in Miami. So the video that I showed at the very beginning was actually produced for this course, and this course is in the second year running. So we go and we teach that. It's actually coming up next month. Okay, so we went through the research. We talk about risks posed by the subtropical and tropical coastal climate environment that we're in for people with spinal cord injuries. We talked about some resilience approaches with partnering with county and nonprofit locally. And all of that was evidence-based from the research that we're generating. And so now we're going to shift gears. I'll tell you about a study that's planned, that's IRB approved, that's underway. And then we'll just kind of zoom out and look at some of the potential rewards. At the beginning here, I'll start with just a bit of a invocation of the imaginary of these rewards. I took all these pictures, and we'll see the tropical Atlantic here kind of from the viewpoint of people with disabilities. So this is a young lady. She actually works for a cruise company. And she has a CMT3. And so she thinks a lot about the ocean and about disability, and cruise lines have a great reputation of being accessible and awesome ways that people with disabilities go and they live for periods of time on the ocean. And here she is enjoying the incoming salt air and spray experience on the front of a boat. She's at the bow right there. Here you have a local gentleman who's quite influential, and he has a cervical spinal cord injury. I actually don't know his level, but I do know that he's AIS-A. And you can see from his wrists, right? He's got like quite reduced hand function. Here he is piloting a boat. He can actually independently pilot this pontoon boat. It's pretty neat to see the compensations, the adaptations that he uses to do so. And, you know, every once in a while, a quote unquote able body has to step in and, like, you know, just take over for the agility of response, especially on the throttle. But yeah, here it is, this person, you know, independently, like, you know, taking us essentially on a tour. It's great. This gentleman who's at the helm here, so he's holding the wheel for this boat, has been in the been involved with the Miami project for decades. Multiple people here might have met him. Some people might have tested him. He's been in multiple of my studies. And here he is. I think this is a 1927, about 19-foot wooden inboard that he's restored. And he actually tells the story of how when he was discharged from inpatient, he was discharged to home and he started as outpatient. And this boat happened to be in the basement of his house. And he says that his rehabilitation approach at home was to go and essentially rebuild this boat, which is pretty cool. And now for half the year he lives between Colorado and Miami. He comes back here and he can pilot this boat. That's actually his nephew, niece, who's in the seat with him right there. Yeah, they're having a good time. This is a gentleman who had an ischemic brain injury. He has kind of delayed intent. It's less like strength and more like coordination and timing with his movement. And he's sailing this trimaran. So one of the great things about a trimaran is that as the boom here swings, as you're tacking or driving, or, you know, the orientation of the sheet to the wind is changing. You don't have to duck to get under it. A lot of times in single-handed sailboats, you're going to have to kind of move yourself from one side of the vessel to the other, starboard to the port, in order to counterbalance. And here with the outriggers, the vessel does that for you, and you're seated down in the hole in the center. And so you don't have to duck to get under that boom. So he can just sail this thing, and he doesn't have to worry so much about his body position. He worries about his lines and his sheets and his rudder. So this is a pretty cool accidental adapted sailing solution. Here's a woman with muscular atrophy, and you can see that she lives with a trach. And here she is simply just existing in the water, which can be pretty powerful. And so from a kind of old school medical terminology, a lot of times this is referred to as bathing. And so through local nonprofits, the Brina Cohen Foundation, at least once a month, we can get people out using these pretty simple assistive devices here, like this chair. It's got 3 wheels and it floats, and get people out into the water. And she's just taken in the sun and the salt water. Here's another gentleman who has a little bit more mobility, and he's able to exit the chair. He has paraplegia, and so he's with himself in the water right here. And I think importantly, the buoyancy of salt water is more so that this person is able to kind of, without really actively moving their arms, keep their face above water and just take this in. So he's from the islands, and said it had been a long time since he'd been back in the ocean, even though he doesn't have a single childhood memory that doesn't involve the Atlantic Ocean. Here's a person who's scuba diving on what is a Coral Restoration Foundation. That's a nonprofit coral nursery. And so this coral is being farmed essentially. And you can see that the diver in the back here with the white shirt is in a nice trim position, and diver in the front who's working on the coral tree here doesn't have fins on, and they're in a vertical position. They actually have paraplegia. It's a neuromyelitis optica caused this, and they're able to scuba dive, and not just scuba dive in a way where the scuba diving is for them and their health, which is an interesting thing to consider, but where they're contributing to the health of the ocean by diving as well. So it's like reciprocal exchange of health between them and the ocean environment. Okay, so what we're doing here to try and quantify all of this great stuff that I just showed you. So all this happens in Dade. This is when in Rome. We're here. We have the tropical Atlantic. People with disabilities access it. And every time they receive the benefits of that, it evaporates as anecdote. And so what we want to do is use our tools as researchers and condense it into data and turn it into what we call evidence. And so we're doing so by starting with what I'm calling a seminal study from one of my colleagues. It's our dissertation. It was defended only 2 years ago, so I'm not sure if it can be at the point of seminal yet, but I'm trying to pull that into the universe. And so what she did is she took this beautiful approach with all of these different survey outcomes, so focusing especially on experiential impact, which can tell you if participation in an activity is transformative. And that's the primary outcome. And she's got all these other disability and quality of life outcomes below that. And she applied this in the context of scuba diving for adults with physical disabilities. And so what we've done, and she published one, she's got 3 papers lined up. Another's been accepted, but it's an embargo. And then she's got her dissertation that's published through Clemson that summarizes this full approach. What we've done is essentially take what she's done for scuba, adapted scuba diving, and we've applied it to multiple other adapted ocean activities. So she has the methodological template. She works at FIU. She's one of my collaborators. And so we take her methodological template and we're just going to scale it. And so we're going to scale it across activities, but also her study was designed cross-sectionally. Take people, they have various amounts of adapted scuba experience and their various points past their disabilities, and you capture them. And so we've designed this to be both cross-sectional. So if we want to, we can capture people for sailing or for fishing or for surfing. We'll see all the activities. Or we can also capture them before they start one of those activities and track them longitudinally. And so all of that is encompassed in this one single study. Hopefully this is going to be what we call like a flagship or bedrock study, and it's going to continue on for years and years, and there'll be spin-off studies that come from this. And so here we have a list of all of those adapted activities. Swimming and bathing, like I showed before, just simply existing in the water can be really powerful. Sailing, we saw power boating, so this would be existing on the water, not in it. Fishing, super common, I should say loved by people with disabilities. I think it's very task-oriented, involves, corticospinal, they got to use the hands, et cetera, et cetera. Paddling, surfing, scuba diving, and snorkeling. Scuba and snorkeling were separated based on advice from our community partners. Great. And so this is IRB approved. The survey is up. It's running. It's informed by Dr. Santiago Perez. And then you can see here in Qualtrics a bit of the survey workflow. It's kind of a beast because we have these different activity types, both a cross-sectional and a longitudinal component. But we've run through it a bunch of times in testing, and we're very confident that it's going to work and not break. Okay, last part of the presentation, I will show you a little bit of what I've been working on with School of Architectures. And this is School of Architecture Design Studio, which is essentially their capstone kind of like bachelor's thesis project. There's actually 3 master's students that are in the class right now, but these students are all here. This is JP, he's a captain at Shake a Leg, and they're on a cat catch sailboat, which is a really unique type of sailboat. And they are leaving from Shake a Leg and they're heading towards Stiltsville. Stiltsville is a very unique maritime architectural situation that's in Biscayne Bay, managed by the National Park System. And so as architects, we're trying to point them toward these problems that architectural solutions will apply to that involve the water and accessibility. And so in order to do this, I'm helping to run that design studio course. We're calling it the Aquatic Disordinary. There are 2 actual architects involved. They're the true experts and kind of good cop, bad cop. I'm the bad cop, and I come in and I try and like force everything to be like about disability and from a disability ethos, not just ADA component. So essentially what we do is we start with the hull of a barge. This is a floating structure. We can see it from the back here. It does have embedded outboards in the holes for it. And what we're going to do is turn this into an aquatherapy platform. So aquatherapy is a billable medical service. It's being conducted on the first floor of the building that I'm in right now. And one of the questions that I've had for a long time is if you take the exact same aquatherapy movements being made in that pool and you had a licensed aquatherapy therapists do that in the ocean, could you still bill for that? And the therapists don't have a good answer for me, but one in Rome, can we do that here? If we were to do so, they would clearly need some type of structure to support them in deploying these people into the water and doing what the movements are that qualify as aquatherapy in an ocean environment. And so here's a couple screenshots of the mural board here. And as we go through it, we'll just look at the plans. This is right at the end of the presentation. But if you're looking at the floor plans here, the bottom floor is on the left here, the base floor. And you can see some of these dotted lines and some of these swivel chairs. And we're just going to go through some of that. So in the back of the boat on your right, these are precedents. This is essentially a collage of examples from other approaches that we want to apply to this structure. And so this is the back of a dive boat. This is all custom manufactured. And this is a lift that deploys into the water. And this is not a commercial boat. This boat is made for recreational diving, and this was a custom job. So we'd have here on the stern of the boat, you can see right here, power lift, some type of lift like this to deploy these people into and out of the water. There's other solutions for this, such as what's labeled here on the floor plans is the swinger chair. And so this is an example of a local pontoon boat that has this chair that swings out from the deck of the boat where you can transfer onto the seat and then deploys down into the water. This is a great way to get in and out of the water when there's a little bit of seas. Here's a picture of someone on their sailboat, and they just hung up like kind of like one of these hammock chairs, right? And take a look at that. It looks kind of like a Hoyer lift. So what if you took these tracks, kind of like the zero-G locomotor tracks that we have here? I believe there's 7 in the Lynn Rehab Center where I am right now, which is just unprecedented. And you use these to protrude out over the water and deploy people into the water. So that's one solution that we've considered as well. You see these nets right here. My father did carrier arrests in a jet airplane called an A4 Skyhawk, so I'm really familiar with carriers. And they have these to capture things on the sides. But if you look at a catamaran, you also have these kind of just to hang out over the water, and people love being leisurely on these. And so we'd have some of these retractable nets that deployed from the boat so that people could have that experience. And then here you have some renderings of the boat in just like, really low res 3D CAD. And the students are working on building that right now. And then you have a couple of beautiful kind of just imaginaries of what this might look like. And that's the end of the presentation. So it looks like we've got about 4 minutes. If anyone has questions, I'd be happy to take that. And thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, David. That was exceptional. Learned a lot about what you've been doing, and you've achieved a lot. And I think they're really exciting initiatives. Obviously, climate change is a big problem for many people, and certainly, as you emphasized today, a disability community. And this ocutherapy in the boat is just sensational. I mean, that's happening on the first floor of the Lynn Center in the area of the pool and things of this nature. Where is this happening?
Yeah, we really want to take what's happening on the first floor of Lynn and make it happen in Biscayne Bay. We are working with the aquatherapists that are here employed by Jackson, and they've come to the class and actually presented to the students. But we really want to make what they're doing possible in a maritime environment. That's the vision for it. So
Fantastic. Okay, any other comments on this really exciting presentation? Thank you so much, David, and you have a great day, and we'll keep talking about some of your initiatives. That picture of John Borgard made my day. Okay, thanks for showing that. That's just a fantastic. John is a good friend of ours, and he always stops into my office and presents a new idea that he always has. So he's just very, very,
yeah. John is nothing less than a national treasure. So.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. You take care. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.